indicating that IQ is a very good predictor of long-term life success. And so here's the general rule. If your job is simple, which means you do the same thing every day, then IQ predicts how fast you'll learn the job, but not how well you do it. But if your job is complex, which means that the demands change on an ongoing basis, then the best predictor of success is general cognitive ability. And I learned that the general cognitive ability tests clump together into a single factor. That's fluid intelligence, or IQ. And then we didn't know if the factor that we had found was the same factor as IQ. And we still haven't really figured out whether or not that was the case, because it kind of depends on how you do the analysis. But anyways, I got deeply into the performance prediction literature, and I found out, well, if you wanted to predict people's performance in life, there's a couple of things you need to know. You need to know their general cognitive ability if they're going to do a complex job. You need to know their trait conscientiousness. Some of you might have heard that rebranded as grit in a very corrupt act, by the way, because it's a good predictor of long-term life success. Freedom from negative emotion, low neuroticism, is another predictor, but it's sort of third on the hierarchy. And then openness to experience, which is a personality trait, is associated with expertise in creative domains. The evidence that, now I should tell you, since it's such a complicated question, I should tell you how to make an IQ test. It's actually really easy, and you need to know this to actually understand what IQ is. So imagine that you generated a set of 10,000 questions, okay, about anything. They could be math problems, they could be general knowledge, they could be vocabulary, they could be multiple choice. It really doesn't matter what they're about, as long as they require abstraction to solve. So they'd be formulated linguistically, but mathematically would also apply. And then you have those 10,000 questions. Now you take a random set of 100 of those questions, and you give them to 1,000 people, and all you do is sum up the answers, right? So some people are going to get most of them right, and some of them are going to get most of them wrong. You just rank order the people in terms of their score. Correct that for age and you have IQ. That's all there is to it. And what you'll find is that no matter which random set of 100 questions you take, the people at the top of one random set will be at the top of all the others. And with very, very, very high consistency. So one thing you need to know is that if any social science claims whatsoever are correct, then the IQ claims are correct, because the IQ claims are more psychometrically rigorous than any other phenomenon that's been discovered by social scientists. Now, the IQ literature is a dismal literature. No one likes it. Here's why. Here's an example. So here's a fun little fact for you, for liberals and conservatives alike, because conservatives think there's a job for everyone if people just get off their asses and get to work. And liberals think, well, you can train anyone to do anything. It's like, no, there isn't a job for everyone. And no, you can't train everyone to do everything. That's wrong. And here's one of the consequences of that. So, as I mentioned, the Armed Forces has done a lot of work on IQ, and they started back in 1919. And the reason they did that was because, well, for obvious reasons, let's say there's a war, and you want to get qualified people into the officer positions as rapidly as possible, or you'll lose. So that's a reason. Now, the Armed Forces has experimented with IQ tests since 1919. And in the last 20 years, a law was passed as a consequence of that analysis, which was that it was illegal to induct anyone into the Armed Forces who had an IQ of less than 83. Now the question is why? And the answer was, all of that effort put in by the Armed Forces indicated that if you had an IQ of 83 or less, there wasn't anything that you could be trained to do in the military that wasn't positively counterproductive. Now you got to think about that, because the military is chronically desperate for people, right? It's not like people are lining up to be inducted, right? They have to go out and recruit, and it's not easy. And so they're desperate to get their hands on every body they can possibly manage. And then, especially in wartime, but also in peacetime. But then there was another reason too, which was the Armed Forces was also set up from a policy perspective to take people in the underclass, let's say, and train them and move them up at least into the working class or maybe the middle class. So there's a policy element to it too. And so even from that perspective, you could see that the military is desperate to bring people in. But with an IQ of 83 or less, it's not happening. Okay, so how many people have an IQ of 83 or less? 10%. Now, if that doesn't If that doesn't hurt you to hear, then you didn't hear it properly. Because what it implies is that in a complex society like ours, and one that's becoming increasingly complex, there isn't anything for 10% of the population to do. All right, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to ignore that? We're going to run away from that? And believe me, we have every reason to. Or are we going to contend with the fact that we need to figure out how it might be possible to find a place for people on the lower end of the general cognitive distribution to take their productive and worthwhile place in society. And that isn't just going to be a matter of dumping money down the hierarchy, because giving people who have nothing to do money isn't helpful. It doesn't work. It's not that simple. Well, so that's kind of an answer to the question of whether or not we should deal with IQ forthrightly. It's like, if you can find a flaw in that logic, like, just go right ahead. It's not like I was thrilled to death to discover all of this. By no stretch of the imagination was that the case. So what? So IQ is reliable and valid. That's the first thing. It's more reliable and valid than any other psychometric test ever designed by social scientists by a factor of about 3. That's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is it predicts long-term life outcome at about 0.3, 0.4, which leaves about 85%, 70 to 85% of the story unexplained, but it's still the best thing that we have. Well, it's also the case that in places like Great Britain, when IQ tests were first introduced, they were actually used by the socialists, and they were used to identify poor people who had potential, cognitive potential, and to move them into institutes of higher education. So there's an upside, a social